Hi, folks. Looks like we've got probably everybody that wants to be on. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Nancy Turbak and OB. I'm the chair of the Coalition for Freedom Amendment G. Dr. Marv Buehner is here today too, and we are anxious to talk with you about this video that has just come out from the South Dakota Department of Health. There's so many things to say about it. I don't really know where to start. I guess I will make what I think is the most fundamental observation about its bizarre nature. Maybe invite Marvin to then take it over from a medical standpoint. But frankly, I could go on till noon talking about what I think is wrong with this video. So we'll try to at least get it rolling, and then I hope you will all just jump in and we can really have a conversation if you'd like that. Here's what is most outrageous about the video. South Dakota has a law that imposes an extreme abortion ban under threat of felony prosecution. The law creates several serious ambiguities, so they created a video supposedly to give doctors clear guidance about what obstetric care is legal and what is not legal. But the video itself says in black and white that doctors cannot rely on any advice in it. A bold disclaimer at the end not only says that it is not providing legal advice, it says that no statement in the video is legally binding. If our own Department of Health and Attorney General aren't sure what South Dakota's abortion law means, if it's so vague that even they won't go on record to make any binding statements, how in the world are doctors supposed to navigate the mess? So you can watch the whole video, and Marv and I will talk more about it with you. But the most amazing thing about the video and the most bizarre thing is the disclaimer at the end. You get to the end and they say, don't hold us to it. Marv, what are your thoughts about that, or what else jumps out at you about the video?
Well, I agree with you 100%. The law is very simple. It says that you're guilty of a felony if you procure or if you perform an abortion for any reason during pregnancy other than to save the life of the pregnant female. It's very simple. There were no exceptions carved out. The intent, and they said the intentional in procuring an abortion. And then in the video, they inserted the word soul to change the meaning of the restrictions. And then they inserted a bunch of restrictions that aren't outlined in the law. And all of those exceptions that they inserted in there are things that we would normally do during our normal course of practice, but none of those are listed in the law. So there are no exceptions allowed in the law, but they inserted all of these new exceptions without legislative authority, without any kind of authority. And then, like you said, at the end, they disclaimed it all. They said none of this can be relied on as legal advice. Consult your attorney. And so it has no weight in law, and you are more of an expert than I am in that. But it really didn't clarify anything. It created exceptions that aren't in the law, and we're supposed to rely on the Department of Health to protect ourselves in a court of law, I guess. I don't know. It's just so crazy. It's absurd. It seems to me a political, a cynical political cover for a law that should have never been passed in the first place.
Yeah, you know, one little thing I want to mention before we go on to the bigger things. When you quoted the law, you used the word procure, and of course that is in the law. It's a felony to procure, and that's an ambiguity that the video doesn't even try to address. What does it mean to procure? You know, if you have a patient who you feel desperately needs an abortion, and you can't perform it here because it's banned, are you committing a felony to help arrange for them to get to Minnesota or Colorado? The video doesn't address the ambiguities about the term procure. But the other thing I wanted to pick up on that Marvin said is referring to the Secretary of Health. And I want to make it clear that I don't fault the Department of Health for this. They didn't ask for this mess to be handed to them. This is all on the legislature. But here we have a video that is entirely the Secretary of the Department of Health talking about what apparently are her views of the law. But she has no authority. She has no authority to make the law. She has no authority to change the law, and she has no authority to interpret it. So her statements are, from a legal standpoint, meaningless. And as I said, they become even more meaningless because of the disclaimer at the end. The Attorney General's office apparently collaborated on this video, and yet even they are not confident in the statements that were made, because the disclaimer says, this video is not legal advice. Moreover, this video and its content is not legally binding. So how can doctors rely on this if they're prosecuted for doing something that the video suggests they can do, and they can't use the video in their defense? It's absolutely a joke. And I think Marv is right when he talks about a political cover. It looks pretty clear that this was made as political cover for opponents to Amendment G that want to pretend the law doesn't create the mess it creates. There's go ahead, Marv.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, there are no guidelines there, and there's no clarity in any of this. This doesn't help physicians practice medicine in South Dakota. And I think at one point, at the end of one of the segments of this, she said that you can do all of these things, just not in South Dakota. And I don't know what that even meant. Why would you have that in there? I mean, basically it doesn't clear anything up, and it would, any physician who saw this video and used those as their guidelines for medical care for complicated pregnancies would be pretty foolhardy.
I get the sense when I watch the video that the state is honestly a little embarrassed about the effects of the abortion law, or at least concerned because as Dr. Buehner said, some of the statements that the secretary makes, apparently trying to smooth off some of the rough edges of our extreme abortion ban, really suggests that things are legal that I'm sure that no prosecutor would agree. And specifically what I'm talking about is, she says, and I think that they're embarrassed about the confusion that the abortion ban causes for miscarriage care. I think that's a big part of what's going on in the discussion of the video. And so embarrassed or concerned about that, the secretary says that you can go ahead and treat a miscarriage because it won't be qualified as an abortion unless the sole purpose of the procedure was to end the fetal life. So in other words, if your purpose is also to stop a woman's bleeding, presumably, the secretary says, that's not an abortion. But if you think about that, and if you took the secretary at her word and imagined that she had legal authority to say what she's saying, she has just blown wide open the abortion law. Because rarely, and Dr. Buehner can address this better than I can, but rarely would ending the fetal life ever be the purpose, the sole purpose. There's all kinds of purposes that women or girls might seek abortions. And you know, whether it's a girl is too young to be a mother, a college student has to finish her degree and can't handle pregnancy and birth. Somebody's a rape victim and they emotionally can't handle carrying the rapist child to term. Those would all be purposes. So to say that as long as there's another purpose, it's not an abortion is absolutely misleading. It's a lie, and any doctor that relies on it is going to be in big criminal trouble.
I absolutely agree with that. And the word soul is not in the law. That was inserted by the secretary to create all of these exceptions out of thin air. Well,
and maybe it's what she wishes were the law. We certainly wish the law were broader and allowed a lot more leeway for patients and doctors. But it misstates the law when it says that. And that's what makes me think it's kind of a political cover piece for pro-life, right to life folks who helped make the video, that they want to pretend that our ban isn't as extreme as it is. You know, another thing that the video is kind of in two halves. The first half seems to be talking mostly about miscarriage care. And then the second half seems to turn to the situation where they're addressing the sole exception in our law to save the life of a mother. And of course, that's created ambiguity too. What does that mean? I guess I'd be interested in what Dr. Buehner thinks about how much they've cleared up the muddy view of that, of what does it mean to say you can do it to save the life of a mother. There's a whole list of conditions that they mention, but then she doesn't say these would qualify. She just says they could qualify. What do you make of that?
Well, it's crazy. And to take that a little bit further, she said that for doctors to protect themselves, they just have to have good intent and they have to document their intentions. What does that mean? We document our intentions on every patient that we take care of. That doesn't create all these exceptions, and it doesn't protect doctors from felony prosecution if some attorney, some prosecutor thinks that, oh, that's not what saving the life of the mother means. They commented that, oh, you can take care of somebody. You don't have to wait till they're at death's door. And they even gave some arbitrary guidelines as far as a hemoglobin level, how much blood, which basically defines how much blood do you have to lose before you can terminate a pregnancy. Well, they arbitrarily picked a hemoglobin of 9, where I don't know where that comes from. And that we have to use our clinical judgment. And she stated that, yeah, doctors should continue to use their clinical judgment and document their intentions and their actions. But none of that protects us from a law that says there are no exceptions.
I think part of the oddity of this whole thing goes back to the law that was passed by the legislature telling the department they had to create this video. And I'm sure all of you have looked at the video, and if you, on that same page of the Department of Health's website, they set out the bill, the language of the bill that required the Department of Health to create the video. And here's something that I think is very odd and problematic about it. It tells the Department of Health to create a video and other materials that describe standards of care applicable to the treatment of a pregnant woman experiencing life-threatening or health-threatening medical conditions. And then it talks about the criteria that a practitioner could use in determining the course of treatment for pregnant women experiencing life-threatening or health-threatening conditions. But that doesn't match our abortion ban. Our abortion ban does not have an exception for health-threatening. So the very direction that the legislature gave the Department of Health is to create a video that talks about something that is much broader than what's allowed under our statute. It's sort of like these people have passed a law and then, don't want to look at it and pretend it doesn't exist. And no amount of subsequent, legislating about medical education and no length of commentary by a Secretary of Health will change it. The law is an extreme ban. It creates confusion. It threatens women and girls, and nothing the Department of Health has done here addresses that.
I agree completely.
What specifically can we answer for any of you?
Hey guys, Jack Durer with the AP. Marvin, could you tell us a bit just about your background, where you come in at this issue?
Well, I've been practicing OB/GYN for 31 years, well, 34 years actually. I moved to South Dakota in 1993 to do Indian healthcare, transitioned into private practice. In the 90s, I became involved with this issue when I had a patient whose pregnancy was diagnosed with anencephaly, a condition in which the fetal head doesn't develop. There's no brain. The top of the head is gone. It's incompatible with survival. And I tried to schedule an induction of labor at 24 weeks when it was diagnosed. And the hospital CEO found out about that and determined that that was an abortion and wouldn't let me do the standard of care that I was trained to do in residency. And I was really upset. And I went to the press and got involved in the whole issue. And then shortly after that, the legislature passed a complete ban on abortions in 2006, and the governor signed it. And I became involved with an organization called South Dakota Campaign for Healthy Families, and we managed to put that on the ballot. We referred it to the ballot, and we defeated that by 10 points. And then 2 years later, they put another initiative on the ballot for an abortion ban, and I was involved in that. We got that defeated as well. And then ever since then, the legislature has been chipping away at abortion rights and making pregnancy care more and more difficult and more complicated for OBGYNs in South Dakota. More and more patients were having to leave the state for care until, Roe was overturned, and then the trigger law kicked in, and here we are. And I just recently retired from my private practice, but I plan to still be active in certain other areas of medicine.
Hi there, I'm Beth Warden with Dakota News Now and KOTA, KEVN TV in Rapid City. I'm wondering, first of all, Nancy, if I can get your title so we can put that on the screen when I do the news story.
I'm the chair of the Coalition for Freedom Amendment G.
Okay. And I have two questions right now, might have more. What is next for your organization? You're telling us of these concerns. What is the next step for you?
Well, the next step is really just continuing what we are doing. I mean, a little bit of this has already started, but in the coming month, there are a number of forums, a couple of debates. I would gladly debate John Hanson anywhere, anytime. So if you want to arrange a more lengthy one, I'm happy to do that. But I know that I think it's a consortium of media that is hosting the a debate in Mitchell. There's a League of Women Voters forum in Sioux Falls. I'm going to be meeting, I believe Matters of State is on your.
Yes,
right?
that's correct.
I'll be there. So that's a big part of it, is just continuing to speak publicly about the problems. A big part of that is giving facts and actual correct legal analysis to combat the misinformation and the scare tactics that are coming from opponents of the amendment. And I expect that in the coming weeks, we'll see an influx of youth involvement. I've got a number of contacts with very active young people in South Dakota. And of course, this issue really affects them even more than it does people of Dr. Buehner's and my generation. So I think that that's going to be happening too. And probably, as you know, young people, a lot of their communication is social media. So I'm hopeful that we will be able to get information out to people that way as well.
My second question to you is more of an observation through the years, and I'm wondering if you want to comment on it. I grew up in a very conservative evangelical church that was what they would call pro-life. I am now a foster mom of 3 children. And one of the things that's always baffled me in the pro-life movement is their stance on abortion, yet not taking a stance on caring for these children that will be born, such as school lunches, federal money available, and it was declined by our state. Where is the care coming in for these children that will be born because an abortion doesn't happen? Do you have any thoughts or comments on that?
Well, my first thought, Beth, is that you took the words right out of my mouth. I wouldn't want to paint too broad a brush. I don't want to paint the Right to Life group with too broad a brush, because there are some individuals who seriously are concerned and they have genuine beliefs, religious beliefs typically that guide them. And they may do other things in their life that are consistent with those beliefs. But you're right, when you talk about the leaders and the politicians that are pushing the anti-abortion movement, the hypocrisy is astounding. I think we have record numbers of kids in foster care waiting for adoptions. Nobody seems to show up for those. We had the federal government offering the state money, I think it was last summer, to feed hungry kids in the summer. And our governor said, no, don't send it. We have a legislature who wouldn't spend $500,000 to feed kids in public schools. You have to ask yourself whether those people are it really has anything to do with life, or does it just have to do with controlling other people and imposing your views on others, especially on women.
Hey, this is Dominic Dowse for the Argus Leader. Can you guys hear me?
You bet.
Okay,
Yes.
awesome. Question for Mr. Buehner. And I know this is a non-exhaustive list included in the video, but the video lays out a list of conditions for criteria to perform an abortion. Even though it is non-exhaustive, do you feel like that list was substantial, or do you feel like there are areas where it missed criteria or needs more explanation?
Well, I applaud them for coming up with that list of medical conditions that would support the action or the treatment option of abortion. It's a good list, but as that she said herself, it's not exhaustive. There's an infinite number of medical conditions that would warrant pregnancy termination. The problem is that none of those are allowed under the law itself. So it was just kind of a useless exercise in listing medical conditions. And so basically it supported what we do on an everyday basis, but it's not allowed under the law. So, I mean, it was a great list of medical conditions, but it was meaningless.
Well, and if, I guess, I think by family heritage, but also by profession, I'm terribly picky about linguistics. And frankly, when you're a trial lawyer, that's what you have to do, is make sure you look very carefully at the words and laws and otherwise. And if you go back and listen very carefully about that list, she says, quote, could be, these could be considered conditions that would justify an abortion. Obviously, that means they also could not be. I mean, they might not be. So what is it? If a doctor relied on that and then is prosecuted, Monday morning quarterbacking puts them right back in the courtroom defending a felony.
And who's going to judge our performance? Right now, we are judged by our patients and we're judged by our peers in the peer review process. And who's going to judge our performance now will be lawyers and judges. And criminalizing an important part of medical care has never been done before, and it has a chilling effect on how women will receive medical care going forward.
Appreciate your guys' answers. If I could just ask one follow-up. Anecdotally, are you hearing, and I think Nancy might have mentioned earlier, kind of the idea of going to Minnesota or Colorado. But in terms of here in the state, are you anecdotally hearing cases where, especially now that this video is out, where a woman needs an abortion, there's this advice sort of, and now they have to be sent to other states because it's like with the state of the abortion law here and this kind of what you're describing as sort of vague medical advice, non-binding, it seems like, why would you even want to touch it here in the state? Is that kind of, anecdotally, have you gotten that kind of sense from doctors?
Except for me?
For either of you, or?
It's too soon since the video, and I think, to see what the effect will be, but I can tell you that since the abortion ban went into effect, I've had conversations with several patients about options for their care of their complicated pregnancy that involve pregnancy termination, but I can't do that here. That's criminalized here. It would be a felony for me to do that. But one of the options would be for you to go out of state, and I could help you arrange care for somebody who could perform the procedure or the treatment for you. It's not unusual to have circumstances like that on a regular basis. Since this video came out, I don't know what the effect is. It's just been too soon.
Thank you.
Marvin, could you please elaborate on, you said this video creates exceptions out of thin air. I assume, like, I think that Nancy spoke about the health exception that the video legislation had, but not the law itself. Could you just expound on that for me, please?
Yeah, two things make me say that. One is the insertion of the word soul, not just intention. And as Nancy pointed out, they're implying that intention is everything, but it doesn't say sole intention. Anytime you terminate a pregnancy, you're intentionally ending a pregnancy, but it's not your sole intention. And they inserted that to allow for all these other exceptions. The law itself says only to save the life of the mother. And then they list all these health conditions, all these health exceptions that aren't imminently life-threatening. And they tried to define with arbitrary standards of medical measurement what that threshold might be. But it's so not clear, and every clinical situation is so different. There's no way you could use the criteria of a hemoglobin of 9 to justify a pregnancy termination when somebody's hemorrhaging. It makes no sense. None of that makes any sense, except those exceptions should have all been should be in a medical armamentarium to start with. And so the law doesn't allow for any of those exceptions because they're health exceptions. And she just inserted, or the health department just was directed to insert these exceptions into the law as if they existed in the first place. And that was never the intention of the legislature that passed this law.
You know, it occurs to me that all these ambiguities that remain and even expand once you get the Secretary of Health talking about it, exemplify why it is so wrong to try to legislate medical care. It just doesn't work. I also think it's interesting that when you look at who they included, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Buehner, but I think certainly the primary professional association of specialists that practice in this area apparently was never consulted. According to the video, they didn't have a role in this. And you know, I'm not suggesting that the video necessarily could have been much more helpful anyway because of the inherent difficulties in trying to legislate and then explain legislation through a video. But I do think it's very telling that ACOG was apparently not included in the preparation of the video.
Nor were any of the other, excuse me, OBGYNs that I know of.
And just one last point to clarify, your main criticisms of this video are that the legal disclaimer at the end, you say it's essentially meaningless to rely on from a legal standpoint. You say it provides political cover for anti-abortion folks who are opposed to your measure. Have I summed that up correctly? And that it creates these exceptions, you say, that are not in the ban itself.
That's fair. I mean, and Dr. Buehner uses the word exceptions. I'd say ambiguities. I mean, it tries to solve some and then it creates others. But you've got it, Jack, I think. What do you think, Doctor?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that sums it up pretty well.
Okay. One last question, if you don't mind. So we've talked about your criticisms of this video. How are, now it's out. How are doctors supposed to use this? Like, what is it for? You say it provides political cover, but it's now out there, released into the world. How are people supposed to use this?
Well, I would suggest that doctors don't use it. I think it
Mhm.
would be foolhardy for a doctor to use this video as a guide to navigating the waters of the abortion of our medical landscape after the abortion ban. I mean, it's that's what we should be doing. That's the medicine we should be practicing, but that's not what the law says. And as Nancy said, the Department of Health doesn't get to determine what's legal and what isn't legal. And it's all it does is create the ambiguities that we talked about. And it makes I think it makes practicing medicine even more dangerous here. Because if the video is out there and we don't terminate a pregnancy that medically where it was justified, do we have additional liability because of that? I don't know. I don't know. I just know that the ambiguities created don't clarify any of the questions. And I think that no OBGYN should rely on that for guidance in their practice.
Sadly, it kind of sets a trap for any doctor who might be gullible enough to rely on it.
That's how I feel too. It does feel like a trap. So you use these guidelines and you have the best of intentions and you document your intentions, and any prosecuting attorney can say, well, wait a minute, the law says that the only justification for abortion is to save the life of the mother. This doesn't look like that. That's just where we are right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Carly?
Hi, I'm Carly. I'm a reporter with Kello. I just had one question. I think Nancy, you touched on it, but any of you can answer. Talked about how it almost seems like the state is kind of embarrassed by their current abortion laws and things like that. Are there certain parts of the abortion laws you think that are, quote unquote, embarrassing the most that you think, or are you able to kind of like clarify what you kind of meant by that?
Well, what I meant by that is, I mean, the abortion law, as Dr. Buehner mentioned, is very simple. It's an extreme ban with one exception: save the life of the mother. But I sensed that they were a little embarrassed about the mess that this has caused for obstetrical care generally, especially for miscarriage care. That seemed to be a big topic at the beginning of the video. I think they're embarrassed that our ban makes it difficult for doctors to know what they legally can and cannot do when a woman is miscarrying. And to a less extent, I think they're embarrassed about the fact that that the law creates a single exception that itself is ambiguous. I mean, she says that you don't have to be, the patient doesn't have to be critically ill or actively dying. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I hope we could take that to the bank. Of course, we know we can't because it really isn't binding, but she says that. And then she says at the other extreme, here are conditions that might qualify the patient for a save your life exception, but not necessarily. So to me, it just, and I don't know what Secretary Magstad's personal feelings are on this. But it just struck me that the state is feeling a little bit foolish about the horrible mess its abortion ban has made for doctors who are trying to take care of lots of pregnant women, not necessarily those who want an abortion. They may very well want their pregnancy, but if they have a difficulty in pregnancy or they're miscarrying even early, the law is confusing. And I think that's left egg on the face of the legislators and now the state Department of Health officials who are stuck trying to make the legislators happy.
And I think they didn't anticipate the political backlash of the fall of Roe versus Wade nationwide and in our state. The vast majority of citizens in the United States and in South Dakota support abortion rights. And they didn't see this coming. And it feels like backtracking in a cynical, cynical political cover for a law that should have never been passed in the first place.
Well, that's a good point. And we haven't brought partisan politics into this at all, but you can't ignore the fact that this has been a very partisan issue. Our legislature is not representative of South Dakotans, even on a partisan basis, it isn't. The governor and her appointees are all of one party. And now, as Dr. Buehner pointed out, now that that party has learned that Americans are outraged at the fall of Roe versus Wade, they seem to want to disown some of the extreme abortion positions they've taken.
Exactly.
Thank you, guys.
Anything else, anybody?
I have one last question, and I hate to ask this since it's a little away from the video itself, but in the context of, just our intersecting issues, maternal mortality, infant mortality. I believe in South Dakota, infant mortality is, I believe it is second in the nation. And we also have maternal mortality issues. Do you feel like this video, or just even the abortion law in place itself? I know we don't have, I don't think we have 2023, 2024 data. But do you feel like the abortion law on the books now is plays a part in worsening that? I mean, I looking at DOH statistics, not I don't have it in front of myself, but particularly it's when I've looked at it in the past, we look at 5-year data for particularly for Native Americans, that's been rising here in the state. Do you feel like this video and just the abortion law itself kind of plays a part in making that the issues that we have here with maternal mortality, infant mortality worse in any way?
Absolutely. I came to South Dakota with one of my intentions was to try to help improve maternal mortality and infant mortality rates in South Dakota on the reservations because they were abysmally high. And after 31 years here in South Dakota, sadly, it's worse than it was when I got here. And to a large extent, it has to do with the maternity care desert of Western South Dakota, meaning there just aren't enough providers anywhere. And so fewer and fewer pregnant women are getting prenatal care or adequate prenatal care. More and more women are struggling with care for obesity, hypertension, and diabetes, especially on the reservations. And more patients are coming into labor and delivery at Monument with little or no prenatal care and with serious complications that could have mostly been prevented. And so how this affects that is fewer and fewer OBGYNs want to come to South Dakota. I recently retired my private practice and I tried desperately to find a buyer, either a group or a private practitioner. I reached out to the healthcare systems and I couldn't sell my practice because you just can't find providers to move into this area. And part of that is the political climate that criminalizes an important part of healthcare. And it's only going to get worse. And sadly, it's worse than when I got here.
Hate to do a Columbo, but one more thing. On that note, I've been looking at I think it was a few days ago where Governor Noem had touted that we have the highest fertility rate in the nation. I believe it was during her RNC speech a few months ago where she, I think she meant to tout the fertility rate again. She did on the RNC stage. She actually said the birth rate at the time, which is also high. Trying to refer to the fertility rate. Do you feel like the executive branch via Noem or the legislature, Republicans in the state in general are, trying to play into the idea of natalism at all? Or pronatalism?
I don't know how to answer that. Because I don't know what their intentions are in that regard, but I can tell you that high fertility rates don't necessarily constitute something to boast about, when it could be just simply due to the fact that contraception is so hard to come by. And when you don't have enough healthcare providers, there aren't people available to put IUDs in or implantable contraception. Barriers to contraception are placed everywhere. Pharmacists don't have to prescribe if they think it's not appropriate to give women contraceptives. There's just so many barriers to women having effective contraception that high birth rates don't sound like something to brag about to me.
Especially not when we have also have high rates of poverty, struggling, single moms, moms that have to have multiple jobs. The other statistic that came to mind, Dominic, as you were talking, and of course, Governor Noem didn't brag about this, but South Dakota also has one of the highest rape rates in the nation. We're about almost twice the national average. And according to to a study that was published by the American Medical Association in the JAMA Journal Internal Medicine in March of this year, in just the first 18 months after Roe versus Wade fell, we had an estimated 1,300 rape-related pregnancies in South Dakota. I guess that's fertility, but it isn't something I would brag about.
Thanks for your time, guys.